Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be looking at section 3.3, completing the square. So completing the square, what this actually means is we're going to be going from standard form, which was this, and we're going to be changing that into vertex form. And the reason we might want to do something like this is because this vertex form was a lot more useful to us. Okay, we could find the vertex, which could give us the max or the min. It could tell us the axis of symmetry, it could help us with the range. It was just a lot more useful than the standard form. So these are going to be our steps. So let's just go through them here quickly, and then we're going to have 4 examples that we're going to look at. So step 1, it says divide the leading coefficient out of the first 2 terms. And actually a better word, instead of saying divide, what you want to do is you're just factoring out the leading term. So if there is a leading term, like down in this one there's a 3, we're going to want to factor that out. Okay, and we do it just out of the first 2 terms. Okay, really important, only the first 2. Do not try to factor it out of the third term. Okay, only these first 2 are we going to pull it out of. Step number 2, it says write a perfect square by dividing the second term by 2 and then squaring it. So that'll make a little bit more sense once we actually do some examples. Step number 3, add the plus minus of the square number. So whatever we got from step 2, we are going to add the plus and the minus, and I'll show you guys why we do that. Step 4, factor the perfect square trinomial and take the negative square number out by multiplying it by the leading coefficient. Okay, and again, all these steps are going to make more sense when we do an example. And then number 5, adjust the constant term to maintain the value. So basically we're going to have kind of 2 numbers at the end. We'll just add them together. Okay, so our first example says just change to vertex form. So step number 1, there's this leading term here. We're going to want to pull that out just out of the first 2 terms. So pull out the 3, and I'm going to be left with an x squared plus 2x, so I only pulled it out of the first 2, and then I got minus 5. Okay, and then what I'm going to do this in a different color, I'm going to take that number right there, so this is step number 2 that I'm now doing. It says divide the second term by 2 and then square it. So I'm going to take 2, divide it by 2, that gives me 1, and then I'm squaring this. Okay, so we're going to square that, and we just get 1. Okay, so now that I have that number, we can move on to step number 3. So in step number 3, you're going to add the plus and minus of that square number that we just got. So let's write out everything we had. Okay, and I left some space in here because that's where I'm going to put that plus and the minus. So let's put a plus 1, and we'll have the minus 1. Now the reason I have to do this plus and minus 1 is so that whatever I have in this step is the exact same as the previous step. Because if I were to simplify this, plus 1, minus 1, those would cancel, and then I would just have what we originally had in the step before. Okay, so I'm not really changing anything, I'm just making it look a little different, but this line equals this line. Okay, for step number 4, it says factor the perfect square trinomial and take the square number out by multiplying it by the leading coefficient. So what I want to do is we're going to take out this negative number here by distributing that 3 to it. Okay, so that is going to give us 3x squared plus 2x plus 1. Okay, and then we had the 3 times the negative 1, so that's going to give us a negative 3 now outside, and then there was still the minus 5. And then kind of the second part to the step is we have to factor this perfect square trinomial. So this right here is a perfect square trinomial. It just means that the first term is a perfect square, the last term is a perfect square, and the middle number is taking the first one, timesing by the last one, and then timesing by 2. Okay, so you could check it just to see. If I took this number, it's just a 1, this number a 1, I times those together, 1 times 1, and then I times by 2, that gets me the middle number, 2. Okay, so it is a perfect square trinomial because I did these steps before. I divided by 2, I squared it, and that caused it to be a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so to factor that, what we're going to get is you just take this number as it comes down. We're going to divide that by 2. So 2 divide by 2, we're just going to get 1. Okay, and this sign comes down and it stays the same. And then I square that. And then on the very outside, the -3 and the -5, I can put those together. That's just -8. Okay, and then I'm done. That's my final answer. So I'm just going to write that over to the side. Okay, and then the good thing about these questions is that I can always check these in my calculator. So I'm going to show you how we can do this in our calculator. So we're going to go into y equals, and let's type in this last function that we got. Okay, and then I can click graph to see what that looks like. Okay, so I get this right here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in what we originally began with. So this right here. So go back, and then we'll type that in. Okay, and now when I graph this, because I changed from this form and I got all the way to this final form here, and I said that those two were the same, when I graph this, this should be the exact same graph. So when this goes to graph, it should literally overlap this first one, and I shouldn't actually see two graphs, I should just see one graph. So let's see. So it's drawing, that's what this means, and it's literally drawing it right over top of the other one. Okay, so both of these two functions, this one that I got here and the starting one that I had there, they're the exact same. So I know for sure this is correct. Okay, on to example number 2. Okay, so step 1, we got a -4 there. We're going to want to factor that out of this term and the second term, but not this one. Okay, do not factor out of that one. So pull out the -4, and I'm left with x squared plus 6x minus 29. Again, don't try to pull it out of that last term or it's going to cause problems. Okay, then we take this number here, we divide it by 2, and we square it. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, and then square that, we get 9. So that's what I'm going to add inside my brackets. So I have a +9 and a -9. Again, I got to do a plus and a minus so that it's not actually changing the function. Okay, and then I'm going to distribute this to the -1 to get rid of that. So when I do this distribution here, I got -4 times -9, so that's going to give me positive 36. Okay, and then moving along, inside the brackets here now, I can factor this. I know it was a perfect square trinomial. So x comes down, positive comes down, and then divide that one by 2. So we just get a 3. Make sure you put a squared around that. And then very last thing on the outside here, we got plus 36 minus 29. That's just going to give me positive 7. So our final answer, I'm just going to write it out, is this right here. Okay, so that was number 2. On to our third example. Okay, and this one, if you'd like, you could pause the video, try to do it yourself, and then after just come back and see if you get the same thing as what I'm going to get. Okay, so first step, -2, we're going to have to pull that out. So -2 gets out front. We're left with an x squared minus a 4x. And then outside the brackets, keep the positive 7. Don't factor out of that one. Okay, take that middle term there. So -4, we're going to divide by 2 and then square. So that's just -2 squared. So we get 4. So we're going to plus and minus that 4 inside the bracket. So we got plus 4 and minus 4, and then plus 7 on the outside. Okay, and then distribute from the front term all the way to the negative 1, not the positive 1. Positive 1 stays inside. So I'm left with x squared minus 4x plus 4, and then that distribution here, we're going to get positive 8 outside. Okay, and then last step, I can do my brackets. I can put these two together, so that just gives me 15. This x will come down, so we get x, negative comes down, and then 4 comes down, and we divide by a 2. So we get a 2 there, and then just make sure you got your brackets being squared. So this is our final answer. Okay, and then again, if I wanted to check this, I could graph the first function we were given and then graph what we got, and we should only get one graph. It should overlap the graph twice, and we just get one graph. Okay, so moving on to our last one here. This one is going to be a little bit tougher. So I see there's a 2 there, so I'm going to factor out the 2. Okay, now pulling out a factor of 2 out of this negative 5, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to show you how we can do that over here. So we got negative 5, and then we're pulling out a factor of 2, so we're dividing by 2. And we can write that a little bit differently. Rather than dividing, we're usually a little bit better at multiplying, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So 2 over 1 becomes 1 over 2. And then simplifying that, just multiply numerator with numerator, denominator with denominator. So I get negative 5 over 2. So that's what's going to be left over in the brackets. So I got minus 5 over 2 x in brackets. Okay, and then you can always check 2 times x squared does give you 2x squared, and 2 times negative 5 over 2x, the 2 and the 2 would cancel, and you'd have negative 5x. Okay, so my next step, I got to take this middle number up, negative 5 over 2, and then I had to divide that by 2, so divide by 2, and then I'm going to square it. Okay, I'm just going to move this other work that we did here kind of out of the way. So again, with this one, I'm going to use the kind of trick. I'm going to change it to multiply and then take the reciprocal. Okay, so in the top I get negative 5 over, in the denominator we get 4. And then squaring that, we just get 25 over 16. Okay, so that's what I'm going to put inside, plus and a minus. Okay, so plus 25 over 16 and minus 25 over 16. And then keep that plus 1 on the outside. Okay, this outside term pretty much stays there the whole time until at the very end you add it with that other term. Okay, so we're going to distribute the 2 to the negative 25 over 16. Then that's going to come outside. I'm just going to finish writing everything else out here. Okay, so when I do that distribution, 2 times negative 25 over 16, that's going to give me negative 25 over 8, plus a 1, and the 1 I'm going to change, that's 8 over 8, just so I'm going to have a common denominator here. Okay, so in the next step, we can factor this perfect trinomial. Okay, so x comes down, negative will come down, and then we're going to take this number and then divide by 2. Okay, and I actually already did that calculation up here. That got me, when I did that middle part there, it got me negative 5 over 4. Okay, so we got 5 over 4. And then on the very outside, we have this right here, so we just got to put those together. That is going to give me negative 17 over 8. Okay, so that is our final answer. I'm just going to write it out. Okay, and then again, if we wanted to check our answer, we just put it in our calculator and make sure both of the functions, this initial one and this one, give me the exact same graph. Okay, so that's our last example. I'm just going to write out our textbook questions here. So it's on page 192, and we got these questions here. Okay, and then just make sure for these questions 2 to 4, you're only doing parts B and D.